I have a little tradition that I like to incorporate. And we're going to open with a prayer, and we're going to say two prayers. We're going to say a healing prayer revealed by, as part from the Bahá'í scriptures, and we're going to say a prayer for the departed. And it's the prayer for the departed part that I like to incorporate in my talks. Baha'is believe that there's no real separation between this life and the next. And so when we remember people in our daily efforts and activities and dedicate our efforts towards them, they advance spiritually. And it reflects back on our lives too. So normally I would have everybody going around the room and mention someone out loud, but we can just do that quietly. And I'd like us just to take a moment and remember someone or some persons that we'd like to dedicate our efforts in their memory tonight, if that's all right. And then I'll say the prayer for the dead, and then we can also think of someone who might need some special healing energies, and I'll say a prayer of healing for that, if that's all right. So we'll just take a moment of silence. O my God, O thou forgiver of sins, bestower of gifts, dispeller of afflictions. Verily I beseech thee to forgive the sins of such as have abandoned the physical garment and have ascended unto the spiritual world. O my Lord, purify them from trespasses. Dispel their sorrows and change their darkness into light. Cause them to enter the garden of happiness. Cleanse them with the most pure water, and grant them to behold thy splendors on the loftiest mount. Thy name is my healing, O my God, and remembrance of thee is my remedy. Nearness to thee is my hope, and love for thee is my companion. Thy mercy to me is my healing and my succor in both this world and the world to come. Thou verily art thou bountiful, the all-knowing, the all-wise. So Baha'is believe that we've been created by an infinite being that's known as God, deity, but known by different names, and that he periodically sends into the world perfect spiritual beings from this spiritual dimension. We know them as prophets of God or manifestations of God, and throughout history they've had various names: Krishna, Buddha, Zoroaster, Abraham, Moses, Christ, Muhammad. And Baha'is believe God's latest messengers, not their last, are the Bab, Baha'u'llah's forerunner, and Baha'u'llah. And these perfect beings, for all practical purpose, share with us what God's purpose for our lives is. So we say that God is completely inaccessible, but yet he created us and we're created in his image. And he can't communicate with us directly, so he communicates with us through these divine perfect beings that are sent to the world. And they live a life. Often they're persecuted. They're not accepted in the age in which they live. That's been the course of every great world major religion. The founder has usually been severely persecuted. They leave behind a set of teachings. Baha'u'llah tells us that in his writings that God has probably sent an infinite number of divine teachers in the world. But what makes the ones that we know by name different is they left a recorded book, usually, some writings left behind. And Baha'u'llah tells us that if we have balance in our lives, then we can have a full expression of health. And disease or dysfunction, the probability of that entering our lives is less. I'm going to start with structure. One of the things that I'm interested in clinically is I've had some postgraduate training in neurology, so I'm always interested in how the brain functions, as well as making sure that people's joints and muscles in their spine are working properly for a fuller expression of health. So one of the things I wanted to just suggest to you is they know that if you stand in a balanced fashion and you sit in a balanced fashion, that you breathe better, you get more oxygen into your system, and your brain works better. And when your brain works better, the electrical signaling fires in a balanced way to another part of your brain called the brainstem. Your heart works better, your lungs work better, your digestive tract works better, any function that you can think of works better. When you slump, your brain doesn't work as well. And so sometimes we have to remind ourselves to practice good posture. You don't have to shift now if you don't want to, but that's all right. So here's a good way to remind yourself to do that. So this is what I do. As I bring my shoulder blades together, and I pull my shoulder blades down to my belt line. And then I just lift my chin up slightly. Now, if this feels odd to you, and it probably does, then that means that you've been practicing poor posture habits. So, I can't do that for you, but you can do it for yourself. Now, when you're in a more neutral posture, what happens is we live in this sea of atmosphere that's influenced by gravity, and the earth is spinning. And so when we're in good posture, the forces of gravity are more evenly distributed, as opposed to this way or some other non-ideal posture position, and that promotes more wear and tear on our body. So when we stand straight and erect or set straight and erect under influence of gravity, as we spin, that causes a change in the firing in our electrical system, which causes our brain to work differently. And when our brain works in a balanced fashion, then we have a fuller expression of health. We can react to the stressors of life in a more balanced way. We can't take the stressors away necessarily, but it helps us not be as irritable, not be as short-tempered, not be as worn out to deal with the stresses of life. Talk about that we all have bad hair days in terms of handling stresses. Of course, my hair looks really good, I know, but we don't $6 haircut, but still looks pretty good. But we do have bad hair days sometimes, and it's not what you do once in a while that gets you in trouble. It's what you do consistently. And so the goal is to find out where you're out of balance in your life and do some things to promote balance, to promote good habit patterns for yourself. What we say in this, and I'm mixing Baha'i principles in with my understanding of health and healing issues. And I should have said this from the start. I'm going to share with you my understanding of how things work. But one of the fundamental principles of the Baha'i faith is the independent investigation of truth. And so you need to really figure these things out for yourself. So hopefully what I'm sharing with you is worthy of your attention. I think it is. But really, if a question comes up, or if I say something that's blatantly wrong, you come and tell me later. I'll be happy to look at what you're saying and correct my understanding of that. So, and hopefully, we're always in a refining process. We're always trying to improve our understanding, to grow in our thinking of how things work, and so on. Let's talk about, I want to talk a little bit about emotional and mental health. There's a Baha'i quote that says, "The reality of man is his thought." This is a Baha'i quote. Yeah. It is. So what we think is what we are on many, many fundamental levels. And there's been all kinds of studies done about the effects of positive versus negative emotional attitudes. And so I have a dear, dear friend who talked to me a little bit about my mental and emotional attitudes growing up. And she had a cute little program, if I can find it. My wife encourages me not to shuffle papers when I'm talking to people, and I thought I wrote these things down, but I guess I didn't. So I'll have to do that from memory then. But that's okay. So let me also say this. Philosophically, we're just going to backtrack. I had a chiropractic professor say that we can't recognize what we don't know. So it's just a fact. We just can't recognize what we don't know. I had another chiropractic professor say that we know what we know. Whatever we know, this is where we're at. This is what we have to deal with. And then Maya Angelou, the poet, African-American poet, said that when we know better, we can do better. And this is part of God's plan for our lives. When we know better, God expects us to do better. When we don't do better, when we know better, there's usually negative consequences to that behavior. But Baha'u'llah reminds us that this is the voice of God speaking. Nothing can befall my loved ones save that which profiteth them. So even in pain and suffering, even in disease, there's incredible opportunities for growth. Many of you heard me speak before and know that I was very ill as a child in a wheelchair and had real serious problems. They thought I was going to die. And I remember, and this went on for about 5 years, and I remember asking God in my prayers, please heal me. And God would always say no, because it didn't just heal me. And then finally one day my prayers were answered. And there were incredible outcomes from all that pain and suffering in my life. I have incredible empathy for people that are in pain and suffering. I think I'm generally a very compassionate person. I got incredible insights about patience and long suffering and all kinds of wonderful things that if I had not gone through that experience, that I wouldn't have acquired in my life. And so this is what the hardships of life are about. To awaken in us an awareness of our spiritual reality, and that this plane of existence, as important as it is to live a good life, is that we're passing through, we're spiritual beings, onto some bigger, greater thing. My Christian friends talk about that they're saved by God's grace and mercy. And Baha'is accept this concept wholeheartedly. But I think in the Baha'i paradigm, what we would say is that, yes, we're all going to throw ourselves on God's grace and mercy, but wouldn't it be nice to have a big platter of a good life lived to offer in thanks to God for all the bounties that He showered upon us, no matter how hard or easy our life may be. So I want to talk about emotional and mental attitudes and the power of positive thinking. And this relates to posture. If you look at a good actor in a movie or on a stage, you never see the actor. You only see the role that they're playing. And you know who they are when you see them. You know who's not there in relation to that. And they can get into their character by manipulating their posture. So posture often reflects our mental and emotional attitudes. And Baha'u'llah says an interesting thing in the Kitab He says that men are known by their countenances. Now, I'm going to share with you what I think my understanding of this is, but there could be many possible interpretations of that. When you look at someone, you know what they're about. When you're watching a good actor, you can read the nuances of their character, what they're feeling emotionally. They're happy, they're sad, everything in between. When you look at someone's facial expression, you know what they're about. You know if they're happy, you know if they're balanced, you know if they're disturbed, and so on. So there's these positive and emotional mental attitudes. Now this technique my friend taught me, she talked about that Baha'u'llah talks about that we have three natures. We have a divine nature, a human nature, and an animal nature. And the animal nature is when we evoke it purely, we are in a fight or flight response. Now, we don't live in the jungle anymore, but we live in a metaphorical jungle. So we're exposed to these fight or flight kind of powerful chemical responses. And but it's rare that the tiger jumps in the room and our life is threatened. And it's very rare that we're physically challenged in this way. And she said the animal nature in us likes to take or repeat anything that's pleasant. Anything that's good, we just like to have more of, right? That's especially true with food, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But we also want to stop or prevent unpleasantness. You know, if the temperature in the room's not right, I want to get the temperature right. If I'm cold, I want to get a blanket, so on and so forth. That's the animal nature. The human nature is a little higher power that we can express, that we can use our faculty of reason. And we can say that if we have an unpleasant situation, and she called negative emotional states DAM signals. And there was a little acronym for danger ahead maybe. So if I'm in a negative emotional state, to tie that back into this meditative process, so I want to be in as positive emotional state as consistently as I can. And I'm not talking about Pollyanna. I'm talking about where it's not adversely affecting my health. She was saying that if you're in a negative emotional state, that's a danger ahead maybe signal, and that you need to do something about it. And one of the things that if you're in an environment with someone that you're not dealing with successfully, and you can't run, you're stuck there, then what you have to call is a higher power. And you can use your power of reasoning to say, let me look into the future of things. And so that's the acronym she used. You can lift yourself up by calling on this higher human reasoning power and say, there's always tomorrow. That person's not going to be here tomorrow. I can get through this. And you'll go, okay, I can do that. But suppose that that person is going to be there tomorrow. And you're looking to the future of things, and it's bleak because this is your boss. You can't quit because for whatever reason, so on and so forth, right? So if that danger ahead maybe signal persists and you're still in a negative emotional state, then she says that what we need to recognize is there's a gap in our spiritual development. And the gap is this experience saying to you, growth ahead, please. And the way you have growth ahead, please, is you have to look and say, what divine virtue that's latent in me that I need to bring out? Because Baha'is accept that we're all created in God's image. This is not an exclusive Baha'i principle. It's a part of the Old Testament and other religious traditions too. And what Baha'is think that means is that we potentially possess all the virtues and attributes of God. That in reflecting in our lives, our dealings, our interactions with one another, that we can be almost God-like completely if we bring out these latent virtues. And that's what that gap is. When you're in a persistent negative emotional state, then it's a signal for you to say, I need to grow a little bit more. What divine virtue do I need to bring out? And that is part of fulfilling our purpose in life. Know and love God, acquire divine virtues, and contribute to the advancement, the ever-advancing spiritual civilization. And so for me, I always look and say, okay, what's my emotional tone? And this is part of getting to know yourself, who you are. Baha'u'llah, in one of his writings, quotes the Imam Ali from the Imam of Islam, one of the Imams of Islam. And he says, and this is in the Kitab-i-Gan, one of Baha'u'llah's major works, the Imam Ali says, he who hath known God hath known his own self. And so part of knowing God is getting to know who we are. And we're not talking about physical selves, even though we have to be aware of who we are physically. But we're talking about who we are, our spiritual nature, and so on and so forth. Are we doing all right so far? Okay, great, excellent. So now I want to talk about a little bit, I could spend a whole night on any of these subjects. So this is kind of like a survey thing. So I apologize if I'm being too brief, but we're going to talk about chemical and nutritional balance. So just back to structure. We know that for the negative emotional state, it can affect who we are posturally. If we practice good posture, it can make us feel and function better. If we practice poor posture, it can make us feel negative. And there's this two-way street relationship. And the same with our chemical and nutritional status. Remember, the Baha'i principle is that it's about balance. If we have balance in life, there's an innate expression of health in our lives. Now, I would say that there's probably very few people in balance. I don't know if you can tell by looking at me, but I probably have a little too much fat in my system. I mean, it's just the way it is, right? So I adapt to it, and it hasn't created enough problems for me to be serious enough about change it. But I'm aware of it. I'm trying to work on it, and so on. So I'm using myself as an example. We can carry all kinds of hardships and still function at a pretty high level. But do we have the fullest expression that we can? And how much energy do we want to put into it? But once you become habituated to good habit patterns, it's little or no energy to maintain them. It's just getting there and getting that habituated to ourselves. What gets us in trouble, food-wise, and in this country, we have very few deficiency problems. Our problems are excesses, usually. And if you can limit significantly, now this is, all you have to take this all in balance. Salt, oil, and sugar, and the food industry has got this down to a science. And I'm sure McDonald's knows the right amount of salt, oil, and sugar to add their foods to make you want to get not one Big Mac, but two. Not a regular fry, but a super-sized fry. I mean, the advertising is all promoted to this. And I'll tell you, Sharon and I have experimented with different, we joke with our kids, we say that we're modified vegans, which is a big joke because we eat meat. But people who are vegans are very sensitive to these things, and so you have to be careful what crowd you share that with. But what we found is when we limit salt, oil, and sugar, we don't retain fluids as much, and our weight starts to normally start to equilibrate at that. And we've had varying successes at this. But this salt, oil, and sugar is so powerful to our taste buds that we want more and more of it. And these things get us in trouble with all kinds of problems. Blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes when they're used in excess. And these are chronic degenerative diseases, meaning that you have to work pretty consistently to manifest them in your lives. Animal fats are rich in an essential fatty acid called arachidonic acid. And arachidonic acid is a precursor to fats that promote inflammatory responses. So that they know that when you eat a diet in high animal fats or oils, that you promote hardening of the arteries and heart disease. They also have incredible studies that show that if you limit your oil intake, no animal, and minimal vegetable oil, that there's been reversal of clogged arteries. So, I mean, it's pretty amazing. But we usually wait till we have, you know, a pretty bad occlusion. Then we go in and get stents or get a plumbing job done on the arteries of our heart and so on, have these dramatic heroic efforts. And you know, when you're addicted to things, has anybody here ever been addicted to things? No, it's if you're addicted, here's how you know if you're addicted to something. If you stop doing it, you get anxious, you have headaches, you get nervous. These are called withdrawal symptoms. Now, I happen to drink caffeinated beverages, and I'm going to tell you I'm addicted. Because if I don't get my dose at the right time, at the right amount each day, I get headaches, I get nervous, I get anxious, I get irritable. Those are withdrawal responses. And so Sharon and I, we're really funny. We'll do really good for like 6 or 8 months on these really great vegetarian-esque kind of diets. And it's really hard because these things really stimulate your taste receptors, right? But if you're eating normal food, unless you're really good at spicing it, it's really boring. It's tough. So we'll fall off the wagon, if you will, and we'll go, we did this, there's this medical researcher named John McDougall. He's out of California, and he's a real extremist. He thinks you shouldn't have any oil in your diet at all. Nothing added, nothing. And he has a lot of major support for that. If we eat whole grains, fruits, and vegetables, that we get everything that we need, essentially. So we were on his diet for a year, and we went to some professional gathering at Red Lobster. We hadn't had anything fatty for a year. And Sharon ordered crab legs with drawn butter, and I think I ordered a steak, and we were trying to talk through the meal going, our taste receptors hadn't been deluged with these powerful stimulants for a year, and of course we fell off the wagon and all that good kinds of things. But there's simple things that we can do if we're motivated enough to reverse these chronic disease processes in our lives. Now, sometimes we need nutritional supplements and things like that, but that varies from individual to individual. But generally, if we all did the basics more efficiently, we'd have a fuller expression of health. They know that if you eat less, you live longer, you live healthier. You know, I'm do as I say, don't do as I do. But it's a big challenge out there. I just want to reiterate this spirituality thing. If we don't know the purpose of something, we're out of touch. If we don't understand the reality of something, we're out of touch with the purpose in our lives. if we don't recognize that we're spiritual beings, that we were created by God, that He sends these divine messengers to give us moral, ethical teachings to promote individuals' virtuous development and spiritual civilization, then we're missing the boat somehow. And we have a choice in this life to maximize our spiritual development or not. And so Baha'is really invite you, whatever your religious background is, to follow the spiritual principles that your religious teachings promote. Because we're saying they're all essentially from God and they're all essentially the same. And then try to live them out in your lives. And what we would say with the teachings of Baha'u'llah, we invite you to look at them a little more seriously, because we think this is God's latest guidance to us. And that it's worthy of our attention, and that it can make our lives better and make the world a better place.